So good afternoon. I'd like to thank the board for coming today. My name is Larry Kogos. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy for People for People. And today we are going to discuss the Break the Bonds That Enslave campaign. So let's just start with a brief overview of how we're going to structure this. So first I'm going to start going over what the proposed campaign is. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but we'll just quickly go through that. Then we're kind of going to structure it in a twofold argument. We're going to have economic arguments that will focus kind of around a consequentialist framework, and then certain moral arguments that are going to have more of a deontological spin to it. So just to start, this campaign is a $90 million proposal to free bonded laborers in South Asia. This will free about 1 million laborers, each valued at $90. So that's just the general premise of the campaign. Its purpose is to just spread awareness and bring media publicity. But my arguments are going to be reasons as to why the campaign is not good and why we should not pursue this campaign because of its unintended consequences. So the first basic argument I'm going to start with is a simple supply and demand graph. I'm sure you've all seen it in basic economics classes. By entering the market and buying slaves, we will, you can see that original demand curve is demand for slaves by non-redeemers, or the market without us essentially, the demand without us. And then if we were to come in, the demand will shift outwards, thereby causing the price of slaves to go up eventually. And this could lead to certain unintended consequences. Another problem of economic effectiveness is the possibility of fraud in the future. Just to give one example, in Sudan there have been similar redemption efforts, but there have been stories where a redeemer organization would come to a village and they would ask if there were any bonded laborers, and the village leader would say, well, hold on a second, let me get back to you. And then they come back with 5 village children who are clearly not slaves, but they would say that they are slaves, and they would essentially cheat the system that way. Another issue is the increased liquidity to the market. What this means exactly is those that argue that the price will not change because of the elasticity of supply. They say supply is elastic, so the price won't change. But with this, what we will do is essentially we'll decrease the matching time it takes for sellers to buy a buyer. So our presence there will, even if it doesn't change the price of slaves directly, it will lower the amount of time that sellers will need to sell the slave, which is another incentive. Then, to address the publicity argument, yes, it could bring publicity, but then this could involve other NGOs who think this is a good idea as well, but their participation could further put upward pressure on the price of slaves, which is bad for the long term. So as we keep freeing slaves, the price that we have to pay to free each slave will be increasing. And this is just seems like a larger pool of funds for slave traders and slave owners to take advantage of. Another issue is that the path the laborers take after their freedom is uncertain. Just to point as another parallel, the U.S. slave emancipation back in the past, there's a quote there from Kevin Bayless, who's the president of Free the Slaves. 4 million people dumped into the economy without any kinds of tools, capital education, political participation, rehabilitative care. Basically, it's just a big question mark. We don't know exactly what is going to happen to the workers. And this is further highlighted and exemplified by the fact that the underlying causes are not addressed. There's still chronic poverty in the region, which is the reason that workers had to rely on using their labor as collateral in the first place. The majority of bonded laborers are in the agricultural sector, and even after they're free, they won't have any ways to get land ownership. Many of these workers are not educated. They are not aware of their rights. They couldn't even read the papers that they were signing. So those problems are still going to remain, and it's just a big question mark. So now moving on to more of the moral arguments. There is this big issue of moral hazard for both the bonded laborers and the government. So I'll explain. In terms of moral hazard for the bonded laborers, it basically provides a cushion for laborers. Someone may consider pledging their labor as collateral if they think that an outside agency is going to come in and pay their debt off. So they could think of it as free money essentially. Then there's the issue of moral hazard for governments. Slavery is illegal. Bonded labor is illegal essentially, as shown during the 1956 UN resolution. But by bypassing the government and directly intervening ourselves, that creates that moral hazard for the government in that we're saying the government doesn't need to act, but we will. So these governments will think, oh, we don't have to do anything because other organizations will, the rich Americans will bail us out. Governments in the past in India and Pakistan and Nepal have generally supported the interests of the elites rather than the bonded laborers. So that's still an issue. Then there's the whole moral argument of commoditizing humans and basically putting a price on human labor. Going back to the U.S. slavery again, abolitionists, including Frederick Douglass, he was freed after someone paid off his debt, essentially, bought his freedom. But even then, they kind of argued against that because it accepted the owner's original claim to the slave, and I was maybe sending the wrong message that this is okay to do in the first place. UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, has previously discouraged this trades for those same reasons, basically saying that the initial contract should not be a legal contract, and a spokesperson even called it absolutely intolerable. Then one more argument, which I actually forgot to address, was again, who do we free? There's that whole issue, but that's just a small point. So in conclusion, I strongly advise against the break the bonds that enslave campaign because of all these question marks. This is a very complex issue. There are certainly arguments on both sides. Yes, slavery is a moral abomination. We don't want to encourage that, but is this the right way to approach it? There's not enough evidence to show that the policy is ineffective. Going back to Sudan, there's not enough evidence there. Because there hasn't really been a systematic way to measure it, hasn't been measured as much. But for the future, we do need to put more pressure on governments so that these governments will act and change their infrastructure to provide education, to provide access to capital. I mean, there's also these questions about microfinance now that could possibly influence access to capital in the future. But again, it is a question mark, so I don't feel comfortable recommending it at this time. So thank you all for coming today, and I'd like to open the floor to any questions.
How do you propose to put more pressure on governments?
How? Well, in terms of specifics, I mean, to start with, $90 million is a lot of money. Basically, just outreach campaign to governments in terms of kind of, see, that's a difficult issue. How do you put pressure on a government that doesn't may not care as much or has interest to the lead as mine? I don't really have an easy answer for that. Maybe just kind of media campaigns and things like going into the region, basically bringing video cameras into the region and then having like documentaries and stuff, bring them back to the U.S. so that people can see, and then American constituents can write to their representative, and their representative could then bring it up. It's a long, complicated process, but I'm sure there is some pressure put on governments right now, but more could be done by organizations, and I think the U.S. government should start having a greater role.
Given all the negative negative consequences of emancipation, do you think that Lincoln did the wrong thing?
Do I think that Lincoln did the wrong thing? No, certainly not, because that would say I support slavery. But Lincoln didn't personally buy the freedom of bonded slavers by paying for them. I mean, that's what the Civil War was. So no, I don't think he did the wrong thing, but I'm not saying that slavery is a good thing or we shouldn't do it to address it. I'm just saying that there's not enough evidence to show that this will be an effective policy. So did that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
Tough question.
You can't go against.
Are you an evil person?
The answer is no. The answer is no.
Exactly.
So I have a question, and perhaps you explained this in the section right afterwards, but when you were showing the supply-demand chart, you said that there was unintended consequences.
Right, I didn't clarify that.
Yeah, can you,
Sure.
and you may have said it right afterwards, and I just
Right.
didn't understand the
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah,
Can you
so-
clarify
sorry,
that for me?
Right, I did skip over that. Basically, that's the consequences and then I touched upon in the future, as in the price of the price of the slave labor will keep going up, and if we keep to our goal is to get rid of it completely in the long term. But if we only address it kind of a small part at a time, that will increase the price for the future. So maybe this will be a $90 million campaign now, but in the future it could be a $200 million campaign to free the same amount of people. So basically that's when we go on to consequences, and the price would keep going up.